Sensible machines. How machine learning fuels the industrialization of information processing. Bernhard SCHÖLKOPF, Max Planck Institute for Intelligent Systems.
On the 9th of November 1989, I was a student in Tübingen.
Thank you very much. I am very much impressed with all these talks that I've heard. And I have to tell you, as someone who often goes to scientific conferences, it's not always like that. Especially the level of the professionalism of the presentation is not like that. So the main goal of my talk is to convince you of this statement. And I think I'll succeed with that one at least. So the world is full of intelligent systems displaying interesting behavior. And I show you some examples here. A white blood cell looking through your bloodstream in pursuit of bacteria right now as we talk. A frog trying to catch an insect. Some individuals doing parkour. And finally, a group of individuals engaging in a complex form of collective behavior, singing a double chorus Bach cantata. The question is, what are the organizing principles that underlie intelligent behavior? One strong contender for these organizing principles is learning. In 1958, the New York Times reported on a new machine called the perceptron. Frank Rosenblatt, the guy on the right, he was a psychologist. He demonstrated that the perceptron could learn from experience. He predicted that later perceptrons will be able to recognize people or instantly translate spoken language. So this was the birth of what's called connectionism, the attempt to build synthetic brains, if you want. Now, around the same time, another revolutionary development was underway. People understood that computers can do more than compute. Computers can process symbols. So this insight really gave birth to the field of computer science as we know it today. And the success of that field was so impressive that funding for connectionism completely stopped. People believed that the manipulation of symbols in programs written by humans should in principle be enough to generate intelligence. In 1956, around the same time, one of the fathers of that field of computer science and artificial intelligence, Herb Simon, he predicted that machines would be capable within 20 years of doing any work a man can do. So these were the days when people still said man when they meant human, but actually maybe there's a little bit more to this. So these guys, they then set out to automate the work that men around them were presumably doing and focused on things like automatic theorem proving and computer chess. And they had some initial successes, but strangely, the problems that appeared simple, such as what most animals can easily do, turned out to be hard. And this became known as Moravec's paradox. So as the promises were gradually disappointed, the promises of artificial intelligence, the interest in the AI community, or the interest in AI in general, eventually declined, and things were quiet for a decade or two, until the field of machine learning came around and started a boom, with the conference attendance numbers going through the roof, and that's what we're seeing currently. Now, using machine learning, we can finally tackle some of the problems that initially looked easy but turned out to be hard. I'll show you one such problem. So this is a PhD student in our lab who is demonstrating to a robot arm how to play this Japanese game of kendama, so to catch a ball with a cup. And the robot first just imitates the movement and then tries gradually to improve the movement by measuring where the ball falls down and adjusting the movement. And then after about 100 trials, the robot can do it, and can do it quite reliably. Machine learning turns out to be particularly strong whenever we have huge data sets. So this is an example of a data set from bioinformatics where a certain type of pattern on a DNA sequence has to be recognized. And what's interesting about this problem, without going into specifics, is that if you have a few thousand training examples, you are basically just at chance level. You can't do the task. But as you move to the right in this graph and go to 10 million training examples, suddenly you do a very respectable job, 70% correct, which is something that humans could never do, because we're never going to look at 10 million of these examples and we don't know what to look for even. So this is a pattern recognition example where we already 10 years ago, had superhuman performance in machine learning. And actually most of the problems that we're currently seeing where we think we have superhuman performance are of this form. So there are high-dimensional and complex regularities that we want to learn. We have, in these problems, typically little mechanistic understanding. We don't know what's going on exactly. We only have data. And a great example for this are lots of medical problems, because essentially medicine is based on experience. As a consequence of these features, we need large training sets to learn the regularities. And what's reassuring from a theoretical point of view is that we can guarantee under certain conditions that in the limit we do the optimal thing. So even humans can't beat us if they use the same training set. But one of the important conditions there, which is usually written in the small print, is that the data has to be IID, independent, identically distributed. That means in particular, nothing should change between training and test time. So the source of the data should be stationary. An impressive success of machine learning was DeepMind's Atari system, which learned to play a number of computer games. So this was, at the time, a few years ago, was interpreted as a form of general AI. And maybe it's still the most impressive such example that we've seen. But still, we should take it with a grain of salt, because the system, first of all, the system needs to be retrained on every game. The training sets are huge. They're actually unlimited. It's an emulation of a video game. And also using some rather clever tricks, the researchers effectively created an IID setting by storing data, retraining, permuting them, etc. So in a way, it's an AI problem, but it's turned into a large-scale pattern recognition problem using these tricks. And if you're interested in that, I discussed this in a commentary that appeared alongside the paper in the same issue of the journal. Now, an area where progress has been quite dramatic in recent years is object recognition. So in object recognition, we train systems on huge sets of labeled data, and by some measure of success, we achieve human-level performance on these sets. However, if there are things in the test image, such as the beach or the sea in these images, that are negatively correlated with the presence of cows in this case, in the training set, then the systems may not recognize cows anymore, strangely. And the reason, effectively, is that machine learning only looks for correlations in data. It doesn't care whether it's the cow or the beach, as long as it's predictive in the training set. So it cares for correlations, it doesn't look for causality. Since they're so highly optimized to a given data set, systems are also not robust with respect to small violations of the IID assumption, which we can get, for instance, by adding a little bit of malicious noise to a test image, imperceptible to a human. So the right-hand image it looks the same, but now the system suddenly classifies this nice little pig as an airliner. So to get more robust, machine learning should move beyond statistics and incorporate causal knowledge. Hans Reichenbach was the first who actually at some point was a professor here in Berlin before he had to move to Istanbul in 1938. He was the first one to understand the connection between statistics and causality. And he postulated that whenever we see two observables, x and y, that we find to be correlated or statistically dependent, there must be a causal explanation for this correlation. So there must be something else that causes both of them. This something else could coincide with one of them. So, for instance, if we find the frequency of storks and the human birth rate to be correlated, which in many data sets is the case, then it could be that the storks bring the babies, it could be that the babies attract the storks, or it could be that there's something else, such as economic development, that causes both of them. Now, interestingly, for the researcher, is that all three of them have the same observable consequences. So if we only see x and y, we cannot tell apart these three cases. And that's a difficult problem. And a related problem, if you have at least three observables, has been attacked by Judea Pearl, who recently won a Turing Award for this. So there are some nice things you can say about that. The two-variable case is still elusive, and we've worked on this in the last 6 or 7 years and published a book on this recently. And in this case, if you only have two variables, you need additional assumptions. So for instance, one of them is an independence assumption that I can explain to you with this object here, which is called a Bechet chair. So when you see this object, your brain makes, or when you see any object, your brain makes the assumption that the object and the mechanism by which its light reaches your brain are independent. Let's state it a little bit more generally. Now, our perception builds on this assumption, and to convince you of this, imagine that we violate this assumption by looking at the object from a very specific point, in this case marked by the little hole. If you do that, then perception fails, because you see an object which isn't there in reality. So this principle can be formulated mathematically and used in inference, but rather than going more into detail on this, I'll show you my favorite application of causal machine learning to data collected by the Kepler Space Telescope. So I hope to get a little bit of the glory from Avi's fantastic talk before by also talking about an interesting topic of astronomy here, exoplanet search. So Kepler has been staring at a patch of Milky Way for a number of years, looking for exoplanets, exoplanet transits. These are events where a planet partially occludes its host star, and this causes a slight dip in the light curve, and the decrease is very small, typically orders of magnitude smaller than the influence of the instrument errors. Now, we observe a set of pixel light curves, sorry for the complicated slide, Y. All of them belong to the same star. And these are affected both by the quantity of interest, the Q, up there, the planet and the star, and by the instrument, let's call it N. Now, recovering, we're interested in Q. If we want to recover Q, that seems to be hard because we don't know N. However, we're measuring other stars as well at the same time. And these other stars are also affected by the same noise source, and in addition, they have no causal link to our star of interest. So you can mathematize that, and you can prove nice results about this. You can develop a method, which we call half-sibling regression, to remove the effect of the noise, and we did so together with astronomers and discovered 14 new exoplanets. And rather than showing you the mathematics, I'll give you a little picture how the method works. And here's why we call it half-sibling regression, so not to be taken too seriously. I hope I don't offend anyone. So suppose we see this picture of 5 siblings. There are some statistics that say that up to 20% of all children have an unpredicted or unexpected father. In some countries, maybe in the past, maybe not anymore, but in some countries, the prime suspect in these cases used to be the milkman, which is why we call this the Milkman Problem. And the problem, now the Milkman Problem is not to reconstruct which child is the milkman's. It's a little bit harder. The problem is we would like to reconstruct the face of the milkman from the faces of many siblings without knowing the mother. Okay, so I have some general thoughts at the end. We've talked about revolutions a lot. There's this general air of change here. And the first industrial revolution, we all know, was triggered by the steam engine and water power. The second one was driven by electrification. So both of them were really about how to generate and convert forms of energy. Now, the current change has been called the digital revolution, but it really started already in the mid-20th century under the name of cybernetics, I would argue. It replaced energy by information. Now, like energy, information can be processed by people, but to do it at an industrial scale, we need computers, we need things like machine learning. Like energy, information is probably a conserved quantity, so we can only ever convert and process it. So I should really be deleting the word generate, especially if we look at Avi in the first row here. Now, the ongoing revolution may have equally far-reaching consequences as the first two industrial revolutions. In fact, I think it might be even stronger, the consequences, because it's really our information processing abilities and not our physical strength or our energy processing abilities that make us human and that are also the basis of human dominance on this planet. And we're beginning to see some of these far-reaching consequences. I mean, we already know from history that information can be manipulated and can be manipulated to control people. And current affairs show that this is the same today, only the change is that we can now do it at an industrial scale. No. AI-driven information processing also touches other notions that are deeply human, such as transparency, privacy, and fairness. So medical applications of AI hold great promise to benefit humankind, but they're also problematic because things like fairness play a particular role for many. I was hoping that I would experience this moment at the end. So in this application, which I'm going to skip now, and you're happy to you can ask me afterwards, and I'll finish with my final pitch here. In the end, it's all about attracting the right people to come here. These are exciting times. The best young people are moving into this field, and we want them to come here. And we want to provide the right kind of environment for these best young people, such as yourself, to do AI research in Europe. Thank you very much.